1.
Welcome back to the Magnolia Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero.
And I'm your co-host, Courtney.
And today, we're kicking things off once again with a third-party dark horse candidate, RFK Jr. and brainworms. But now, we can add a new ailment to the long list of ailments this anti-vaxxer, anti-science, and all-around lunatic RFK Jr. also suffers from mercury poisoning, dating back to 2010 and 2012. Apparently, the mercury poisoning a result of eating too much fish. He said he was addicted to tuna sandwiches. Doctors say both can have long-term ramifications. That's right. A man who knows he has brain damage wants to be president of the United States. What do you think, Miss Courtney?
Honestly, I don't have much to say about it. I mean, the ramifications are fog and confusion with brainworms and mercury poisoning, and that's just not somebody I want running for president. I mean, I would prefer someone that's got, a clear mind and no brain damage.
Yeah. I mean, they want to attack Biden for his age. Trump's essentially the same age and obviously a raving lunatic. Even the new polling from Fox News, which again, we don't like to talk about too that much, has him up, I think, 6 or 7 points. Biden, that is, nationally. So
I think it just goes back to my point I made on our last episode, which was the people who are commenting on Biden's health are the people that have the health problems.
Yeah, they're projecting. Not only does the right wing in this country project on more or less everything they say, but even when it comes to health issues, they project their problems, like, erectile dysfunction, onto the President of the United States, Joe Biden. I don't know what to say for RFK Jr. I mean, the man's entire family has come out against him. The entire Kennedy clan has endorsed Joe Biden for re-election, yet we are still dealing with the hard-to-understand RFK Jr. I mean, not only hard to understand from what are his political objectives, he doesn't want to take sides when it comes to Biden and Trump. He truly believes he's going to be elected in his own deranged mind. The failed attorney, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., used brainworms as an excuse to reduce the amount of alimony he would have to pay because, quote, I cannot earn a living. So he figures he deserves a promotion since he can't work as a trial attorney anymore, a promotion to President of the United States. It's absurd.
It's very absurd. Definitely not someone I want in office. Everything else aside, I don't want someone coming out and saying, yes, I have brain damage to run for president. Like, all of his other misgivings, aside, that's just not something I would like you to be of sound mind and body before you took the presidential office.
Sort of like this is breaking in the last couple of days. Back in 2017, Trump went up to Wisconsin and with the directors and CEO of a company called Foxconn actually got some golden shovels and quote unquote broke ground on what was going to be a Foxconn center. I'm not sure what Foxconn even is other than a con itself. And they were going to bring 15,000 jobs to that part of Wisconsin. However, all they did was dig a hole, and nothing has been built. No bill was ever passed. They leveled 100 homes to make way for a plant that was never built. So, on that exact same plot of land, which is already owned by the United States, it already has hundreds of millions of our tax dollars invested in it. Joe Biden is bringing in Microsoft to run a data center. One of their primary AI data centers will be located on that same plot of land where Donald Trump promised 15,000 jobs. This will bring 2,000 jobs, and they will train and educate an estimated 100,000 people in how to use LLMs, or AI, in other words. Which, I mean, that's poetic justice if ever there was some. Back to RFK for a moment. Think about this. We were rescued by modern science when this plague that Donald Trump allowed into our country, that went on to kill 1.6 million Americans and cost the American economy trillions of dollars. If RFK Jr. had been president of the United States, there would have never been a vaccine.
That's a whole lot more deaths that would have been squarely on his shoulders.
We would literally still be dealing with this today in the United States of America. We would still be in the throes of the COVID pandemic, sheltering at home or whatever, having our grandparents die, having our friends die. I had a 27-year-old friend who came within probably 24 hours of losing his life to COVID in the early days. But we would still be in the early days, 4 years out from the first infections, discovered, of course, on that famous day, March 13th, 2020, when parts of America began to shut down. If Trump had been a responsible president, the country would have started shutting down ports of entry, especially from the Far East, China, Japan, etc., going all the way back to November. For example, today, the NIH has already prepared a vaccine for a disease that has yet to infect a single American, bird flu, because there have been some confirmed cases of bird flu being transferred to human beings in countries outside the United States. So while it's a small batch of vaccines, if someone in the United States gets sick, we already have 160,000 doses and then can build out from there, meaning we already have the cure ready. That's what real leadership looks like, folks. So if there's any false equivalency being made, like the false equivalency being made by RFK Jr. when he said both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have attacked the Constitution in what will be a dramatically failed bid to be president of the United States, on Ari Melbourne's show on MSNBC, which got quite contentious because RFK would essentially answer no questions at all, since he has no policy positions other than vaccine bad, I'm good. Just think of that. Think of that. We had swine flu, H1N1, bird flu, Ebola. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. When George W. Bush was president, how many plagues did we have?
0.
Exactly. President Obama.
0.
President Trump. One big fuck up. And before he left office, 1.1 million of us had already died. Everyone in this country, with the exception of people who don't have a lot of friends, had someone in their circle of friends or family affected by this. In fact, my grandmother who raised me was in a hospital dying in October of 2020, just a few months before the first vaccines were given out to the general population. And I was unable to visit her regularly or to stay for an extended period of time. Had to go through several temperature checks on every floor of the hospital before I was allowed into her ICU room. It was eerie. And to think that if this idiot costs us our democracy, the Kennedy name will be soiled forever. In my mind, it's already soiled. And we have to remember the McCarthy era, when Joseph McCarthy was going after communists in Hollywood. his chief staffer was Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s father. He was never the liberal icon that his brother Jack, or John F. Kennedy, was until he was, of course, assassinated. Well, again, that the information I've discussed thus far about the rather toxic interview that took place on MSNBC was on Ari Melbourne's show. You can YouTube it. It's pretty common at this point. Things did get nasty, and of course he made this equivalency that Joe Biden has attacked the Constitution just like Donald Trump did, but he refused to get into the mud and say anything bad about anybody. So, first of all, RFK Jr., show us an example of Joe Biden abusing the U.S. Constitution.
I can't think of
I'll
any.
invite you onto the show.
I can't think of any.
We'd love to have you on, you crazy fucking wacko. We'd love to have you on. You and your strained voice and all. You can bring your, whatever fake money you have, your monopoly money, because you blew through Kennedy money. How does someone spend Kennedy money? But you did it, and now, out of a bit of desperation, you take right-wing PAC money that would have otherwise gone to Donald Trump, or did go to Donald Trump and then was funneled to your campaign, to be a dark horse candidate who, and again, the most perfect example of poetic justice, is taking more votes from Donald Trump than from Joe Biden.
I don't understand how they thought that would take votes from Joe Biden to begin with. I mean, just his stance on vaccinations alone. Like we talked about earlier, we don't vote for crazy anti-vaxxer wackos. Mm-hmm. Like I don't know how somebody didn't step forward and say, hey, this is going to backfire.
Yeah, that's the awkward and troubling thing about RFK Jr. We're already seeing the anti-vaxxer movement promoted heavily by RFK, who claims part of his health problems were from the vaccinations that he received.
But it's funny, you notice he never got polio or mumps or measles. Like, he was safe.
Right.
But all the other people who are coming after him, that we want them to get sick.
Right. I mean, that was the whole thing with the vaccinations. There was a group of people, when we're talking about the COVID vaccine now, there seemed to be a group of people in this country who didn't want to get the vaccine. They wanted everyone else to get it. So they'd be safe, but they wouldn't have to, put that, quote, poison in their body. Turns out there was no real side effect to it at all, unless you were very, very old or had some sort of pre-existing condition that you didn't disclose to the person administering the drug or your physician. So there were very few cases of that. But someone with an extremist view as RFK Jr. has now led a state like Florida, which has really gone astray. Florida has gone off the political map, being led by second Nazi in charge, Ron DeSantis. And we're starting to see diseases long eradicated from the United States begin to return through wastewater samples. So they test wastewater samples in major metropolitan areas, and with the anti-vax movement that's really taken hold in Florida, in places like the Villages, which is a retirement community, by the way. So we're talking about a lot of old people who are very susceptible to these types of illnesses. We're seeing diseases that have disappeared from the United States reemerge. This is a terrifying trend, especially if it takes hold in other right-wing, nonsensical states with lunatic governors. We're talking about you, Kristi Noem, in South Dakota, which, I mean, it's not like you have that many people in South Dakota to lose in the first place. So try not to poison any more of them or walk them into gravel pits.
I did just check, and in the state of Florida so far, in the 5 months we have been into 2024, they have had 10 to 19 cases.
Of what?
Measles. Apologies.
Yeah. Measles. So measles, mumps, and rubella are returning to the American healthcare landscape at a time when we're doing everything we can to reduce healthcare costs. States like Florida are going to demand federal funding now to help fight what will certainly be an outbreak of measles at some point when an entire school has to be shut down because of measles, or an entire university, an entire town, an entire portion of the state, maybe the whole panhandle, because the state has been progressively getting redder and redder as snowbirds from places like Michigan and Wisconsin concentrate in the armpit that is the state of Florida. And yes, I don't care if I offend Florida residents. It is what it is.
You know, I miss the days when you were in school and their biggest concern of something going around was lice.
Yeah, the lice days. I was, speaking of things going around, I was a freshman at the end of my freshman year. I had just turned 15 years old in February, and on April 20, 1999, the loudspeaker came on at a high school of about 3,000 students, by the way, very big school, telling us that no one was excused from the classroom for any reason, and we could hear the police outside classroom doors chaining the doors shut because of what happened in Columbine, or at Columbine in Colorado. And I remember thinking that day, as all of the panic began to subside, that we would never live through something like this again. Then in 2004, 5 years later, the assault weapons ban, which had been in place since 1993. So for any of you gun nuts out there who have a fetish about your AR-15 or your M4 carbine or AK-47 or whatever else you might have, these weapons that have been used to massacre babies, 6 and 7 year olds, especially at Sandy Hook. There was a time in this country, including in this century, when they were unavailable across the board unless you had a special license because you worked for a police force, a police agency of some kind or another. Now they've inundated our society because they're cheap to make. They are selling like hotcakes because people like us realize we have to have guns too. This is America, so we've got to carry them. There's guns in our area, and that's where we're at, where even hardened liberals who are anti-gun and anti-gun fetish have to have guns that make us feel uncomfortable because of our neighbors. And we don't know if our neighbor might be some sort of an incel who might just come out one day shooting at everybody and everything that moves, because it happens far too often in this country. And again, I suppose RFK would oppose doing anything about that, just like he would have the COVID pandemic, which again, we would still be dealing with if he had been president. He also, then this was on PBS, and PBS NewsHour, had no answer for women's reproductive health. In fact, he called abortion grotesque. Although he claims he's a pro-lifer, he'll always be a pro-lifer, he had no solution for the national crisis we face now, as some women are having to drive as far as 17 hours to access health care in this country. That's what it's come to. The Dobbs decision is going to drive the 2024 election, and that gives me confidence that America will hold one more time in what is again the election of our lifetime.
I agree, and I think if we can if we can get in a Democratic House and Senate as well, then we're going to be set for at least a little while.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult to hold the Senate this time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the January 6th riot, the attack on the peaceful transfer of power, obviously started by Donald Trump when he said, "Be there, will be wild." Of course, he was talking about a violent uprising against the People's House and Senate in a joint session of Congress where they certify the election results. RFK Jr. called January 6 a peaceful protest in a PBS NewsHour interview. He continued to attack MSNBC. He continued to attack MSNBC host and interviewee Ari Melbourne, accusing him of trying to stoke division in the nation by bringing this up in the first place. Quote, "I'm an attorney, and I would pardon a lot of people on a case-by-case basis." So RFK Jr. is essentially saying, as plainly as he can, that, well, as evasively as he can, that he's going to pardon January 6 insurrectionists.
I really want to know what his definition of a peaceful protest would be, considering there were several people that had heart attacks, there were several suicides after the fact, and there were, I want to say, like 175, 200 people that were injured. I mean, that's not a peaceful protest.
I think it was 175 police officers alone.
Yeah, just police officers, and then, civilians as well, once you count that in. I mean, that was not a peaceful protest.
RFK Jr. went on to attack Biden and blamed him for defending Europe. You heard that right. He blames Biden for defending European democracy. There is not a greater threat to national security than Russia and Vladimir Putin. Being able to send that country into disarray using American weapons, American money, American allies, their weapons and their money, from the Poles to the Brits and everyone in between, who, with the exception of Viktor Orban's Hungary, Fox News' favorite country, with a GDP of $170 billion. That's right. By the way, Apple made that much money in their last quarter. And that's the entire GDP of a country that's worshipped by the far right in this country, because it's run by the weakest strongman in the history of the world, second probably to only Kim Jong-un, and Viktor Orban, who of course has aligned himself heavily with Russia, as had Belarus. So it's a mess. That is a mess. RFK Jr. is a mess. He has no answer for any of his positions except when he's on right-wing media. Notice when he's on Fox, he is laser focused on being as partisan as possible, on attacking the President of the United States, on defending Trump's record, because ultimately the goal was to have him take votes away from Joe Biden and to try to help propel Trump back to the White House. Well, it's not working out that way, is it, Donnie boy? While you sit in a freezing cold courtroom and listen to people say awful things about you and you can't say anything back. Yes, it's called a gag order because you're in a trial, not a rally in Indiana someplace. Which, by the way, here's an interesting point. Indiana primary the other night. Nikki Haley got 22% of the vote. Nikki Haley, it's a shock. It's a shock. Nikki Haley hasn't been in this race since March. She hasn't been in the race since March. Yet Indiana voters, 20-something, 22% I think altogether, said, no, after you, Donald Trump, we're going to vote for Nikki Haley, even though her candidacy's been dead for a long time. It happened again in D.C., where she actually won the primary in D.C., and in Michigan, we saw similar numbers.
I think at this point, Republicans are just grasping at any candidate they can that is not Donald Trump to try to keep a leg in this race, and they're losing very quickly.
I think there are three scenarios. There's a hold your nose and vote for him anyway because I put party ahead of country. That's one position those 20% of Republican voters can take. There's another position where they could say, Joe Biden's done some pretty good things. He's brought 15 million jobs to the country. We're talking about jobs created after all of the jobs lost during COVID were brought back. So these are just basically job numbers since September of 2022. 15 million jobs, manufacturing jobs. We've seen over 800,000 manufacturing jobs returned to the United States. We've got an infrastructure bill that was $1.6 trillion that's being spent across the nation to build things like actual facilities in places like Wisconsin, where Donald Trump went with his gold shovel and dug a little bit of a hole, which is all that's there today, or that all it was there until the Biden administration got hold of it and started working with Microsoft to put in an AI data center, which they're going to be needed. AI is really on the way. But that's essentially the position of RFK Jr. It's a wasted vote. I wouldn't even consider it. It doesn't matter how much you hate one candidate or the other candidate or whatever, and you think, well, no, just stay away from the, unless, of course, you're a Trump supporter and you like an alternative to Trump. I guess a lot of these people voting for Nikki Haley could vote for RFK Jr.
True. I mean, like I said, I think they're just grasping at the least evil candidate they can find now without leaving their party because they're still so staunchly anti-Democrats.
And there's an issue we're leaving out here with RFK Jr., something you and I haven't even talked about. RFK Jr. is only on 6 state ballots. 6. He claims to have the signatures necessary to get on state ballots in all the battleground states, which still wouldn't get you elected president. So this sham of a campaign he's running, which again, he's not even being invited onto Fox News as regularly as he was at the beginning of this thing, is really stands in stark contrast to where he was a year ago when he announced his candidacy. And the right-wing media was just tickled to death with an anti-vaxxer, who's pro-choice, so it helps them evade the fact that they would immediately, if given full power, they would immediately enact a national abortion ban, probably something between 6 and 12 weeks, so that they can catch most women before they ever know they're pregnant. They would also, more than likely, monitor women's menstrual cycles, ages 15 to 50. That's the proposal that's been put forth by lunatics like Lindsey Graham. 15 to 50, we want to know what's going on with you. And they've sent out Katie Britt, a Republican representative from the state of Alabama, rather attractive young woman, to be the messenger for this whole thing, and what she's calling the Moms Act. The Republicans are calling it the Moms Act in the House of Representatives because it'll do so much for mothers. It'll do nothing for women who want control over their own bodies, because this would be an involuntary menstrual cycle tracker. Yeah, thank you.
I know that you're all upset and up in arms about it, as a lot of Democrats are, but there is a special place in hell, and I harbor a special type of hatred for the women that are spearheading this. Like, how hypocritical, and just, like, I don't even have words. How can you be like that to other women? Like, how are you okay with your own choice being taken away? But, if you think about it, it's really not going to be them. They'll be exempt from it. They'll be able to find what they need and get their health care. It's just the rest of us that'll have to suffer.
Yeah, they'll call up Harlan Crow or Leonard Leo, the right-wing billionaires who run the Supreme Court, and have them pay for a private flight to a European country where abortion is still perfectly legal, and they'll have the procedure done there. But democracy is under attack from these people. We have to be wary of it. We have to be aware. We have to stay engaged. And that's going to be a lifelong investment for my generation and certainly for Miss Courtney's generation. It's not something where we can take an election off and just not vote, especially if you live in these crucial swing states. That is until we kill the Electoral College, which requires killing the filibuster. And since Joe Manchin won't do it, we have to find a way to hold on to Sherrod Brown in Ohio and John Tester in Montana. Ruben Gallego is going to be fine in Arizona, which I think will actually bolster Joe Biden and help him carry the state of Ohio. Bob Casey's going to be fine in Pennsylvania. I don't know what in the world the legacy media is doing even talking about this. I don't know what the legacy media is doing talking about half the things they're talking about. The legacy media is so infiltrated with interest from corporations that either advertise with them or have some role in ownership of these legacy news organizations that they're no longer these big, powerful companies. I think last I heard, CNN was valued at something like $4 billion total. $4 billion? Do you know how quickly Mark Zuckerberg could spend $4 billion? Or Elon Musk, or Google, or Apple, or Microsoft? $4 billion is chump change. It's a joke.
Yeah, that's nothing.
And so there are so many corporate overlords, so many layers of people who could have their feelings hurt, or whose mothers might, call their sons who are executives at these companies and have them go and complain to their, ultimately what are their employees. So, it's going to be exhausting because we told you back in 2020, this is the election of a lifetime. There's no sending it out. 2024 is the same way. 2028 will likely be the same way until Donald Trump is dead and gone, until Steve Bannon, who, by the way, his prison sentence, which has been on hold for 2 years, might be on the verge of being enacted. He denied a subpoena from the January 6th committee back in 2022. He was sentenced to 5 months in prison. He's been able, because of a Trump-appointed judge, to stay out of prison pending his appeal, which is not how it works for 99.99998% of America. You wait on your appeal to go through while you're in prison, or hope that it gets expunged from your record if you're released from prison before your appeal goes through. That's just not how the American system works. And if there's any rotted human being who I think might actually be the brainworm that got into RFK's head, in Steve Bannon, the man who said, quote, flood the zone with shit when promoting Donald Trump's candidacy for president, and to some extent it worked.
Yeah, I mean, we got Donald Trump as a president. I do agree, though, that this, even more so than the last election, I really think the one this year is going to be the election of a lifetime, because in 2028 it's to be foreseen. But a lot can happen with Trump in these next few weeks and in his upcoming cases. I think a lot of precedent's going to be set of what to do with former presidents in these cases. Mm-hmm. So I really believe that this election is going to be a turning point for America.
Well, I hope so. Because we have to get to a place where the Republican Party and men like Tim Scott, who were once viewed as moderates, let's face something first of all. Tim Scott only runs as a Republican and has only put himself in this awful situation because he knows it's very unlikely to be elected as a Democrat. That's Tim Scott. And he has gone from that, extreme. Tim Scott, the one person who's a member of a minority in the United States Senate on the Republican side. He's gone from that to a full-on election denier who won't even concede that if and when Joe Biden wins re-election, knock on wood, that he wouldn't say. He would only say he'll be happy to have President Trump back in office. He'll be tickled. And of course, this is all part of his tryout for the VP position, because it's obviously not going to be Mike Pence. Mike Pence isn't even going to vote for Donald Trump. So, and because, Trump tried to have him hung on January 6th. And from what I understand, that's the last time the two of them had any type of conversation whatsoever.
That'd be a pretty strong motivator for me not to vote for somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I was speaking earlier about that PBS NewsHour poll. I'm sorry, PBS NewsHour interview with RFK Jr. So, let me just read from my notes here. RFK Jr.'s equivalency that he tried to draw by saying Biden has also attacked the Constitution. Biden, it wasn't exactly the plan, first of all, for him to be taking more votes away from dementia defendant J. Trump than from Joe Biden. But that's the way it works when 90+% of Democrats believe in vaccines, believe in women's reproductive health care, believe in gun restrictions, believe in a lot of the policies that the rest of the Kennedy family believes in. Let's see. Polling. So most Democrats, even those once open to voting for RFK Jr., are now repulsed by his extreme positions on vaccines, health care, and he opposes abortion access. Now, on liberal media like MSNBC, he'll say he's been a strident pro-lifer all of his life. Well, he was a lot of things all of his life, including a fairly decent guy, from what I understand, until, I don't know, the brain worms ate the part of his brain that made him decent. Let's see. When he does anticipate an answer about women's, he couldn't give an answer at all. In an interview on PBS NewsHour, he could not give an answer, would not give an answer, is really the truth of the matter when it came to protecting women's health care. He said he kind of likes the current model of throwing it to the states and letting the states decide, where Democrats and President Biden want to enshrine Roe v. Wade into law of the land, which means a 22-week viability, right? 22 weeks, and everything else is, as far as late-term abortions go, which is less than 1% of abortions that occur in the United States pre-Roe v. Wade, was usually to protect the mother. So in a state like Texas, the doctors have to decide, is the sepsis that this mother has from carrying a dead fetus bad enough? Is she close enough to death for us to act without having these vigilante laws where anyone, just anyone, Joe Blow on the street, the heroin addict who sleeps in the alley next to the hospital, gets word that you helped this woman end a pregnancy, a late-term pregnancy, with a fetus that wasn't viable anyway, with a fetus that was already dead, that was literally killing the mother, from suing the doctor, getting the doctor a 2-year prison sentence in some states, a $10,000 fine right off the rip, which is guaranteed, $10,000 in civil penalty that will go to that, like I said, heroin addict who's sleeping in the alley, let's just talk about it the way it is. Neighbors against neighbors. That's the entire point of this right-wing regime. And that's why they brought a scumbag like RFK Jr. onto the scene in the first place. Miss Courtney, comments, please help me out here.
Excuse me. The Republicans and the conservative movement, they just feed off the division and, like you said, neighbors versus neighbors. I think they're just trying to cause so much chaos that it's distracting people from the real issues, and I think that's what's allowed Donald Trump to even get into office in the first place.
Yeah. It's talking about getting one person into office or the other person into office. President Biden's decency, President Biden's incredible empathy after the tragic life that he has lived, of course, losing his first wife and his first daughter to a car accident back in, I think it was 1973, and nearly losing both his sons. Later, in 2015, actually losing his son, Beau, to a brain tumor caused by a burn pit in Iraq when he was serving this country in the United States military before returning to serve this country some more as the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, and would likely be president today if it hadn't been for the terrible cancer that consumed his brain and killed him in May of 2015. Biden was attacked by Robert Hur, special counsel left in place by the Department of Justice, appointed initially by Dementia J. Trump, a president who should be erased from American history, in my opinion. Robert Hur actually wrote in his report that Biden was a forgetful old man who couldn't even remember when his son died. I'm pausing on purpose here. Those in the world in which I grew up, those are fighting words. You say that about me or my family, and Robert Hur, you and I, whether you kick my butt or not, we're going to have to go out back and have a talk about this. And by talk, I mean I'm going to smack you in the mouth. The amount of pressure that was on Joe Biden at that time to decide whether or not to run, because we knew Hillary Clinton's not the greatest candidate in the world, but she did have a 19-point lead over over Donald Trump at one point. And with all of that happening, not remembering the exact moment, having some brain fog around something that had to have been so difficult, that has to still be so difficult, even for Jill, who was not Beau's biological mother. We're talking about trauma. A father's not supposed to bury his son. And it wasn't as if his son took a bullet in Iraq. He came back from Iraq with cancer from burn pits. This was, again, a product of the last Republican regime, George W. Bush, who's basically stuck his head in the sand and has been going around painting the wounded warriors he wounded. He wounded them. He's responsible for their grotesque injuries, for their missing limbs, for the noses and faces that have been blown off. This is what Republican autocracy looks like. And when you put people in office like George W. Bush, like Donald Trump, we are seeing remnants of Nazi behavior. I mean, with Trump, we've seen flat out support for Nazis in the Nazi movement in this country. Then the far, far, far right, including the Proud Boys, which is mostly military guys. So these guys actually have some military training. They're not like the Oath Keepers of the 3%ers, which is kind of a goofy bunch of morons with terrible history and facts pointing away from them. But it doesn't stop them from, putting on a show. I I really don't know what to say about Robert Hur. That investigation should have been shut down by the spineless little weasel that is Merrick Garland. I'm sorry, Merrick. I know you were nominated for the Supreme Court, and for 11 months, Mitch McConnell wouldn't even allow a vote to occur on your appointment to the Supreme Court, and instead we end up with 3 justices on the Supreme Court appointed by a deranged lunatic and Donald Trump. And we thought, oh, we get you back, we'll get Republicans back by putting you in charge of the Department of Justice, when as soon as an Attorney General was appointed, or even before an Attorney General was appointed and voted on by the Senate, Donald Trump should have been in handcuffs. We have all of the evidence we need. We have the tweets, the text messages, the phone records. We have the speeches he gave at the Ellipse before the protesters marched down and tried to dismantle American democracy. Robert Mueller's report said Donald Trump should be arrested for 10 counts of obstruction of justice, which would be a second case unto itself, the day he left office. Now, a lot of America didn't hear that because Bill Barr, the fat pig that he is, ran interference for the Trump campaign. I'm sorry, the Trump presidency, because he was his attorney general for a while, who's repulsed and disgusted by him and wrote an entire book about what a piece of crap he is, but is going to vote for him because he's the Republican nominee. And that's more important than the country itself. Any final thoughts? We've had some rambling here. I know this hasn't been the most compelling episode we've done thus far. I just feel like it was one that had to be done so people understood the extreme position of a man like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the damage he'd do to this country if he manages just to pull enough votes away from Joe Biden to make Trump president.
I do think we have a new newsletter coming out we're going to start working on, though.
Yes, yeah. It's going to be behind our paywall. I'm going to post it to our Patreon once a week. I'll try to get it up over the weekends. It's a really, I'm letting it all hang out with these newsletters that I'll be posting. It's $5. You go to patreon.com/Magnolia Media Network. Magnolia like the flower. Magnolia Media Network at patreon.com. $5, you'll get our newsletter. You can send us your email address. I'll send you that directly if you want to use Cash App, Venmo, however you'd like to do it. We're set up to get you that newsletter if you're a fan of the show. We appreciate you so much. We're already halfway to our first year goal, trying to get to that 1,000 listener mark, so that we can begin to see some return from this and we can keep bringing you this podcast. We appreciate your support so much, whether you're local here in Tennessee, you're one of those unrepresented liberals who have common sense and want common sense changes in this country, like an end to the filibuster and an end to the racist electoral college, which was literally put in place just so slave states could be represented in national elections for president. That's it. That's all. And maybe statehood for the 750,000 residents of Washington, D.C., more residents in something like 11 states: Wyoming, the Dakotas, Montana, Idaho, which I think has 2 cities. These are the things we're fighting for. We're fighting for common sense gun reform, and we're doing it from the eye of the storm and the belt buckle of the Bible Belt here in Knoxville, Tennessee. Although we love our city, we love our state, it's just a shame to see what Republicans have done to it from the state legislature, especially when it comes to taxation, when it comes to unionization. That's why the Chattanooga plant unionizing was so big to have that happen in the state of Tennessee, which has turned firmly against labor and toward the very small number of millionaires and billionaires this state has, and the 275,000 Tennesseans who still have no access to health care because while we pay federal taxes to supplement other people's health care, because Medicaid has been expanded in all but, if I'm not mistaken, 8 states now. It might be 10.
Which includes Tennessee.
Yeah. And so that's why we have 274,000 people. When I was caring for my sick grandmother and couldn't work full time, I didn't qualify for a rebate on the Affordable Care Act health insurance, on the healthcare.gov, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it. So Medicaid would have been the natural option for me, only I'm a Tennessee resident. Well, I'm a Tennessee resident in a different position now. So, I intend to stay here at least another year as we try to build out this podcast from right here again in the eye of the storm. And we appreciate your help so much. Again, you can give at patreon.com/Magnolia Media Network. You can help by simply listening, liking, subscribing, downloading episodes wherever you get your fine podcasts. We're available across platforms. Courtney, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Nope, I'm good here. Just remember to like, share, tell your friends.
Yep, we appreciate you so very much. So from us here at the Magnolia Media Network and the Magnolia Media Podcast, until next time, be well.